English Listening Podcast. TOEIC 700 points. Chapter 1: Corporate Governance and Compliance. The multifaceted landscape of corporate governance has evolved substantially in recent decades, largely in response to high-profile corporate malfeasance cases that precipitated more stringent regulatory frameworks worldwide. Boards of directors increasingly face heightened scrutiny regarding their fiduciary responsibilities, with particular emphasis on their capacity to provide effective oversight of executive management while simultaneously representing shareholder interests with unwavering diligence. Sarbanes-Oxley legislation, enacted in the aftermath of egregious accounting scandals, mandates rigorous internal controls over financial reporting processes and imposes personal liability on chief executives for material misrepresentations in financial statements. Compensation committees, typically comprising independent directors, deliberate extensively on executive remuneration packages to ensure alignment with performance metrics and to mitigate potential conflicts of interest that might otherwise compromise organizational integrity. Compliance with intricate regulatory requirements necessitates comprehensive monitoring systems capable of detecting potential violations before they escalate into significant legal or reputational liabilities. Corporate whistleblower protection provisions have been substantially reinforced through legislative initiatives designed to shield individuals who expose fraudulent activities from retaliatory measures that might otherwise deter such disclosures. Audit committees maintain responsibility for appointing independent external auditors, reviewing financial reporting processes, and evaluating the effectiveness of internal control mechanisms that safeguard against fraudulent activities. Sophisticated compliance programs incorporate preventative measures, detective controls, and responsive protocols to address the diverse regulatory landscapes in which multinational organizations operate. Corporate ethics officers develop and implement codes of conduct that articulate expected behavioral standards, providing practical guidance for navigating ethically ambiguous situations that inevitably arise throughout normal business operations. The proliferation of environmental, social, and governance (ESG) criteria has fundamentally transformed how institutional investors evaluate potential investments, compelling publicly traded entities to demonstrate substantive commitments to sustainable business practices beyond mere perfunctory acknowledgments. Shareholder activism has intensified considerably, with institutional investors increasingly exercising their influence to advocate for governance reforms, environmental responsibility initiatives, and enhanced transparency regarding corporate political contributions. Proxy advisory firms wield significant influence over shareholder voting patterns, providing institutional investors with analytical frameworks for evaluating complex governance proposals and board composition recommendations. Regulatory compliance requirements vary substantially across jurisdictions, necessitating carefully calibrated approaches that satisfy local requirements while maintaining consistent global standards throughout multinational operations. Board diversity initiatives seek to incorporate varied perspectives into governance deliberations, reflecting growing recognition that homogeneous decision-making bodies frequently exhibit substantial blind spots that can inadvertently compromise organizational performance and stakeholder interests. Chapter 2: Macroeconomic Factors Affecting Global Business. Persistent inflationary pressures throughout developed economies have compelled central banks to implement increasingly restrictive monetary policies, despite considerable uncertainty regarding their potential ramifications for economic growth trajectories and employment statistics. Currency fluctuations introduce substantial complexity into international business operations, particularly for multinational corporations with extensive cross-border transactions that expose them to exchange rate volatility. Geopolitical tensions frequently manifest in economic sanctions, trade restrictions, and regulatory barriers that disrupt established supply chains and necessitate rapid strategic adaptations. Contractionary fiscal policies implemented to address burgeoning sovereign debt levels often reduce aggregate demand, potentially precipitating recessionary conditions that adversely affect business revenue projections across multiple sectors. Demographic shifts, particularly aging populations in developed economies, significantly impact labor market dynamics, healthcare expenditures, and retirement systems, thereby creating both challenges and opportunities for forward-thinking enterprises. Global interest rate disparities influence capital flows between economies, affecting currency valuations, investment patterns, and financing costs for multinational enterprises operating across various jurisdictions. Supply chain disruptions emanating from natural disasters, geopolitical conflicts, or public health emergencies have highlighted vulnerabilities inherent in just-in-time inventory systems, prompting reevaluation of geographical diversification strategies. Commodity price volatility presents particular challenges for manufacturing concerns, necessitating sophisticated hedging strategies to mitigate potential margin compression during periods of rapid input cost escalation. Technological disruption continues to transform traditional industry structures, rendering established business models increasingly obsolete while simultaneously creating unprecedented opportunities for innovative enterprises. Protectionist sentiment has resurged in numerous major economies, manifesting in heightened tariff barriers, expanded foreign investment restrictions, and intensified scrutiny of cross-border transactions with potential national security implications. Central bank digital currency initiatives represent potential paradigm shifts in monetary systems, with profound implications for payment processing mechanisms, financial intermediation functions, and cross-border transaction protocols. Income inequality metrics have deteriorated in numerous developed economies, potentially constraining consumer spending capacity among lower-income demographics while simultaneously concentrating purchasing power among affluent cohorts with distinct consumption preferences. Productivity growth trajectories have displayed considerable heterogeneity across economic sectors, with technology-intensive industries generally demonstrating more substantial efficiency improvements compared to service sectors characterized by substantial human interaction components. Evolving climate change policies introduce regulatory uncertainties that complicate long-term capital investment decisions, particularly for entities operating in carbon-intensive industries facing potential transition risks as regulatory frameworks continue developing. Chapter 3: Digital Transformation and Disruptive Innovation. Digital transformation initiatives frequently encounter substantial organizational resistance despite executive sponsorship, largely attributable to entrenched operational methodologies and apprehension regarding skill obsolescence among existing personnel. Legacy system integration presents formidable technical challenges when implementing enterprise-wide digital solutions, often necessitating complex middleware architecture to facilitate data exchange between disparate platforms with incompatible protocols. Cybersecurity considerations have become paramount as digital transformation expands potential attack surfaces, compelling organizations to implement defense-in-depth strategies incorporating multiple protective layers rather than relying on perimeter defenses exclusively. Data governance frameworks establish comprehensive policies regarding information classification, retention requirements, access protocols, and quality standards throughout the organizational ecosystem. Artificial intelligence applications have progressed substantially beyond basic automation, increasingly incorporating sophisticated machine learning algorithms capable of identifying complex patterns within unstructured data that would otherwise remain imperceptible to human analysts. Quantum computing developments promise exponential processing advantages for specific computational problems involving combinatorial optimization, potentially revolutionizing fields ranging from cryptography to molecular modeling once practical implementation challenges are overcome. Augmented reality technologies overlay digital information onto physical environments, creating innovative possibilities for maintenance procedures, complex assembly operations, and immersive training simulations across numerous industrial applications. Natural language processing capabilities have advanced dramatically, enabling sophisticated virtual assistants capable of understanding contextual nuances and responding appropriately to increasingly complex user inquiries across multiple languages. The proliferation of connected devices comprising the Internet of Things generates unprecedented data volumes that, when properly analyzed, yield actionable insights regarding operational efficiencies, preventative maintenance requirements, and consumption patterns. Digital twins, virtual replicas of physical assets incorporating real-time sensor data, enable sophisticated simulation capabilities, predictive maintenance applications, and scenario testing without operational disruption to actual equipment. Distributed ledger technologies provide immutable transaction records maintained across decentralized networks, potentially revolutionizing processes requiring independent verification without trusted intermediaries. Fifth-generation wireless networks deliver substantial bandwidth improvements and latency reductions essential for applications requiring real-time data transmission, including autonomous vehicles and remote surgical procedures. Ethical considerations surrounding artificial intelligence implementations have gained prominence, particularly regarding algorithmic bias, decision transparency, and appropriate human oversight of automated systems with significant societal impacts. Chapter 4: Strategic Human Capital Management. Contemporary talent acquisition strategies increasingly leverage predictive analytics to identify candidates whose attributes correlate with exceptional performance and cultural alignment, thereby transcending traditional credential-based screening methodologies. Employee engagement initiatives have evolved substantially beyond conventional satisfaction surveys, increasingly focusing on psychological and emotional connections to organizational purpose that sustain discretionary effort during challenging circumstances. Succession planning processes incorporate sophisticated capability assessments and developmental interventions designed to prepare high-potential individuals for advancement opportunities before vacancies materialize, thereby ensuring leadership continuity during organizational transitions. Performance management systems have progressively shifted toward continuous feedback models supplemented by periodic calibration discussions, largely supplanting traditional annual review processes widely criticized for their retrospective orientation and limited developmental impact. The transition toward hybrid work arrangements has necessitated fundamental reconsideration of managerial approaches, team dynamics, and organizational culture maintenance when workforce members operate across diverse geographical locations with varying degrees of physical interaction. Total rewards philosophies increasingly recognize the heterogeneity of employee preferences, incorporating customization options that enable individuals to prioritize compensation components most aligned with their particular circumstances and values. Workplace diversity initiatives have expanded beyond demographic representation metrics to emphasize psychological safety and inclusion practices that enable all employees to contribute their unique perspectives without apprehension or constraint. Learning and development platforms increasingly incorporate microlearning components, social learning elements, and personalized learning pathways that accommodate diverse learning preferences and scheduling constraints. Leadership development programs increasingly emphasize contextual adaptability and emotional intelligence alongside traditional strategic capabilities, reflecting growing recognition of interpersonal dynamics' critical influence on implementation effectiveness. Organizational network analysis techniques identify informal influence patterns, collaboration bottlenecks, and knowledge flow dynamics that remain invisible within formal hierarchical structures, yet significantly impact operational effectiveness. Employee wellness programs have expanded beyond physical health dimensions to address financial well-being, psychological resilience, and work-life integration challenges that collectively influence productivity and retention outcomes. Workforce analytics capabilities enable sophisticated labor cost optimization, capacity planning, and productivity analysis, provided that appropriate data governance frameworks and privacy protections are conscientiously implemented. Cultural transformation initiatives require sustained commitment throughout leadership hierarchies, as employees invariably scrutinize behavioral consistency rather than accepting aspirational value statements at face value. Chapter 5: Supply Chain Resilience and Risk Management. Supply chain vulnerability assessments systematically evaluate potential disruption scenarios across extended value networks, quantifying operational and financial impacts while identifying mitigation opportunities that enhance organizational resilience. Geographic concentration risks have received heightened scrutiny following recent disruption events, prompting reconsideration of supplier diversification strategies despite potential efficiency trade-offs and coordination complexities. Supplier financial viability monitoring has intensified substantially, with procurement organizations implementing sophisticated early warning systems designed to identify deteriorating conditions before they manifest in performance degradation. Logistics network optimization increasingly incorporates disruption scenarios alongside traditional cost minimization objectives, reflecting growing recognition that excessive efficiency may inadvertently compromise adaptability during extraordinary circumstances. Inventory management philosophies have undergone significant reevaluation, with many organizations strategically increasing buffer stocks for critical components despite associated carrying costs and potential obsolescence risks. Supply chain visibility platforms aggregate real-time data from disparate sources throughout extended value networks, providing unprecedented transparency regarding inventory positions, material movements, and emerging bottlenecks. Blockchain implementations offer promising solutions for supply chain provenance challenges, enabling immutable documentation of chain of custody information, particularly valuable for products subject to counterfeiting or ethical sourcing concerns. Transportation mode diversification strategies acknowledge that over-reliance on particular logistics channels may create systemic vulnerabilities, despite potentially increasing operational complexity and administrative overhead requirements. Make-versus-buy decisions increasingly incorporate resilience considerations alongside traditional cost analyses, with potential control advantages of vertical integration receiving renewed appreciation despite potential capital intensity. Nearshoring initiatives seek to reduce geographical dispersion throughout supply networks, potentially sacrificing certain labor arbitrage opportunities in exchange for enhanced responsiveness and diminished transportation complexity. Supplier relationship management programs increasingly emphasize collaborative innovation and mutual development rather than transactional efficiency exclusively, recognizing interdependence inherent in contemporary specialized supply networks. Supply chain sustainability initiatives encompass environmental impact reduction, ethical labor practices, and responsible material sourcing, reflecting both regulatory compliance requirements and evolving stakeholder expectations regarding corporate citizenship. Scenario planning exercises specifically addressing supply chain disruptions enable organizations to develop contingency protocols, identify capability gaps, and justify investments in resilience measures that might otherwise appear unjustifiable through conventional return on investment calculations. Chapter 6: Advanced Marketing Analytics and Consumer Behavior. Predictive modeling techniques enable sophisticated customer propensity analyses, identifying hypermobility prospects for acquisition initiatives and highlighting existing customers exhibiting early attrition indicators that warrant proactive intervention. Multivariate testing methodologies allow simultaneous evaluation of numerous marketing variables across digital platforms, accelerating optimization cycles through statistical analysis of interaction effects that would remain obscure through sequential testing approaches. Attribution modeling has evolved substantially beyond simplistic last-touch frameworks, increasingly incorporating sophisticated algorithms that distribute conversion credit across multiple touchpoints according to their relative influence throughout protracted customer journeys. Customer lifetime value calculations inform acquisition investment parameters, retention program prioritization, and service differentiation strategies, recognizing that profitability varies dramatically across customer segments despite similar transactional metrics. Sentiment analysis algorithms extract attitudinal insights from unstructured text data across review platforms, social media channels, and customer correspondence, providing invaluable feedback regarding product performance and service experiences. Psychographic segmentation frameworks transcend traditional demographic classifications, grouping consumers according to psychological attributes, value systems, and lifestyle patterns that more accurately predict purchasing behaviors and communication preferences. Marketing mix modeling quantifies relative effectiveness across various promotional channels, enabling evidence-based budget allocation decisions that optimize overall marketing return on investment despite measurement challenges inherent in multi-channel attribution. Neuromarketing research methodologies measure physiological responses to marketing stimuli through techniques including eye tracking, facial coding, and electroencephalography, providing insights regarding subconscious reactions that participants might struggle to articulate through conventional surveys. Dynamic pricing algorithms continuously adjust offering prices based on numerous variables including inventory levels, competitive positioning, demand patterns, and individual customer willingness to pay indicators, discerned through behavioral analysis. Consumer privacy regulations have imposed substantial constraints on data collection and utilization practices, necessitating carefully constructed consent management platforms and anonymization techniques that balance analytical capabilities with compliance requirements. Location-based marketing technologies deliver contextually relevant messages when consumers enter specified geographical parameters, though successful implementation requires delivering genuine value rather than merely exploiting proximity awareness. Emotional branding strategies forge psychological connections transcending functional attributes, recognizing that durable competitive advantages increasingly derive from intangible associations rather than easily replicable feature sets. Recommendation engines employ collaborative filtering algorithms to suggest relevant products based on behavioral similarities between customers, substantially increasing cross-selling effectiveness compared to static merchandising approaches. Chapter 7: Financial Markets and Investment Strategies. Contemporary portfolio theory emphasizes diversification across asset classes with distinctive correlation characteristics, potentially sacrificing maximum returns during specific market conditions to achieve more consistent performance throughout complete economic cycles. Alternative investments, including private equity, venture capital, real estate, and infrastructure projects, have garnered increasing attention from institutional investors seeking enhanced returns and diversification benefits beyond traditional equity and fixed-income securities. Environmental, social, and governance (ESG) integration methodologies have evolved substantially beyond simple exclusionary screens, increasingly incorporating sophisticated materiality assessments regarding sustainability factors most relevant to financial performance within specific industries. Quantitative investment strategies employ complex algorithms analyzing vast datasets to identify temporary pricing inefficiencies or statistical patterns predictive of future performance, often executing transactions at speeds unattainable through traditional analytical approaches. Derivatives markets facilitate sophisticated risk management strategies, including hedging against adverse price movements, though improper utilization without adequate understanding of embedded leverage characteristics has occasionally precipitated substantial losses. Fixed income securities exhibit complex relationships with interest rate fluctuations, with duration measurements quantifying price sensitivity to yield curve shifts that affect various maturities differently based on timing of future cash flows. Emerging market investments offer potentially enhanced returns accompanied by distinctive risk profiles, including currency volatility, political instability, liquidity constraints, and governance concerns requiring specialized analytical frameworks. Passive investment approaches tracking broad market indices have gained substantial market share, largely attributable to their lower fee structures and empirical evidence suggesting most active managers struggle to consistently outperform relevant benchmarks after expenses. Behavioral finance research illuminates systematic cognitive biases affecting investment decisions, including loss aversion, confirmation bias, and recency effects that frequently lead investors to suboptimal outcomes despite rational intentions. Private market valuations introduce substantial complexity due to infrequent transactions, limited transparency, and potential conflicts of interest when general partners maintain significant discretion regarding portfolio company appraisals. Systematic risk factors including momentum, value, size, and quality have demonstrated persistent return patterns across extended periods, forming the foundation for factor-based investment strategies seeking exposure to specific characteristics associated with long-term outperformance. Central bank interventions following financial crises have fundamentally altered market dynamics through quantitative easing programs, negative interest rate policies, and forward guidance mechanisms with uncertain long-term consequences for asset valuations and investment strategy efficacy. Chapter 8: Strategic Negotiations and Stakeholder Management. Effective negotiation preparation encompasses thorough research regarding counterparty priorities, constraints, and alternatives, thereby facilitating development of creative solutions addressing underlying interests rather than becoming fixated on initial positional demands. Anchoring strategies leverage psychological tendencies, whereby initial reference points disproportionately influence subsequent discussions, though overly aggressive implementation risks damaging relationship dynamics essential for successful implementation. Multi-party negotiations introduce coalition dynamics and procedural complexities absent from bilateral discussions, requiring careful attention to voting thresholds, agenda control, and sequential agreement strategies that prevent subsequent renegotiation attempts. Stakeholder mapping exercises identify key constituencies affected by organizational decisions, assessing their relative influence, interest levels, and potential alignment with organizational objectives to inform engagement prioritization strategies. Cross-cultural negotiations require heightened awareness regarding divergent communication styles, decision-making processes, and attitudinal differences toward time horizons and uncertainty that might otherwise create misunderstandings despite mutual good intentions. Negotiation framing significantly influences receptiveness to identical substantive proposals, with gain-focused presentations typically generating different responses than equivalent propositions expressed in loss avoidance terminology. Best alternative to negotiated agreement, BATNA, development strengthens negotiating leverage by reducing psychological dependency on agreement, thereby enabling more confident rejection of unsatisfactory terms regardless of sunk costs invested in discussions. Stakeholder communication strategies should incorporate appropriate transparency levels, engagement frequency, and channel selection based on constituency characteristics and relationship objectives, recognizing that standardized approaches rarely satisfy diverse stakeholder expectations. Negotiated implementation mechanisms frequently prove equally important as initial agreement terms, particularly regarding dispute resolution procedures, performance metrics, adaptation protocols for changed circumstances, and consequences for noncompliance. Integrative bargaining approaches seek to expand available value through identification of complementary interests, different preference intensities across issues, and creative options that generate mutual benefits exceeding those available through purely distributive negotiations. Stakeholder engagement initiatives increasingly emphasize authentic dialogue rather than merely disseminating predetermined messages, recognizing that sustainable solutions to complex challenges typically require incorporating diverse perspectives rather than imposing unilateral approaches. Emotional intelligence significantly influences negotiation effectiveness through enhanced awareness regarding psychological dynamics, particularly when addressing difficult conversations involving both substantive disagreements and relationship dimensions requiring careful navigation. governance mechanisms formalizing stakeholder input on organizational decisions have expanded beyond traditional shareholder primacy models, increasingly incorporating advisory councils, community representatives, and other mechanisms for systematically incorporating broader perspectives into strategic deliberations. Chapter 9: Regulatory Compliance in International Business. Transnational regulatory frameworks governing international business operations have expanded substantially in scope and complexity, presenting formidable compliance challenges for organizations operating across jurisdictional boundaries with divergent requirements. Anti-corruption legislation, including the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and UK Bribery Act, impose stringent requirements regarding interaction with government officials, necessitating comprehensive training programs, due diligence protocols, and internal controls to mitigate enforcement risks. Trade compliance regulations encompass export controls, sanctions programs, and customs requirements that vary substantially across jurisdictions, requiring sophisticated screening systems to prevent inadvertent violations through seemingly routine transactions. Data protection regulations have proliferated globally following the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation implementation, establishing stringent requirements regarding consent mechanisms, processing limitations, and cross-border transfer restrictions with substantial penalty provisions for noncompliance. Antitrust enforcement has intensified substantially in numerous jurisdictions, subjecting proposed mergers and acquisitions to heightened scrutiny while simultaneously addressing potentially anti-competitive practices, including information exchange among competitors, exclusionary conduct, and abuse of dominant market positions. Financial services regulations have expanded dramatically following systemic crises, imposing enhanced capital requirements, stress testing protocols, consumer protection mechanisms, and comprehensive risk management frameworks designed to enhance institutional resilience. Environmental compliance requirements encompass emissions standards, waste management protocols, chemical registration processes, and sustainability reporting obligations that vary substantially across jurisdictions despite increasing international coordination efforts. Intellectual property protection strategies must address jurisdictional variations in substantive standards, enforcement mechanisms, and procedural requirements despite harmonization attempts through international agreements. Regulatory investigations require carefully calibrated responses, balancing cooperation imperatives against privilege protection concerns, recognition of potential collateral consequences in parallel proceedings, and proactive remediation measures demonstrating organizational commitment to compliance. Labor and employment regulations display substantial cross-jurisdictional variation regarding working time limitations, compensation requirements, collective bargaining frameworks, and employment termination procedures, necessitating localized compliance approaches within consistent global principles. Corporate tax compliance has grown increasingly complex amid governmental efforts to address base erosion and profit-shifting strategies, requiring sophisticated transfer, pricing documentation, country-by-country reporting, and substance requirements beyond formal legal structures. Industry-specific regulations impose specialized requirements in sectors including pharmaceuticals, financial services, telecommunications, and food production, frequently requiring dedicated compliance functions with specialized expertise beyond general corporate capabilities. Chapter 10: Organizational Change Management and Cultural Transformation. Successful organizational transformation initiatives invariably require visible executive sponsorship, compelling articulation of change rationales, and consistent behavioral modeling that demonstrates authentic commitment beyond rhetorical endorsements. Resistance to change frequently manifests through passive behaviors rather than explicit opposition, necessitating careful attention to subtle implementation barriers, including delayed decisions, perfunctory compliance, and resource allocation patterns inconsistent with stated priorities. Change readiness assessments evaluate organizational capacity for transformation across dimensions, including leadership alignment, employee engagement, implementation capabilities, and available bandwidth, given concurrent initiatives competing for attention and resources. Cultural transformation requires sustained commitment throughout extended timeframes, recognizing that deeply embedded assumptions and behavioral patterns typically resist superficial intervention attempts despite initial enthusiasm. Change management methodologies emphasize stakeholder identification, impact assessment, communication planning, and training provision appropriately sequenced throughout project implementation timelines. Middle management engagement proves particularly crucial during organizational change initiatives, as these individuals translate strategic directives into operational reality while simultaneously addressing frontline concerns and channeling implementation feedback to senior leadership. Organizational network analysis techniques identify informal influence patterns that may either facilitate or impede change initiatives independent of formal authority structures reflected in official hierarchies. Communication strategies during transformational initiatives should acknowledge implementation challenges rather than presenting unrealistically positive narratives that undermine credibility when inevitable complications emerge during execution phases. Cultural assessment methodologies systematically evaluate shared assumptions, behavioral norms, and collective values that influence organizational functioning beyond formal policies and proclaimed mission statements. Psychological safety creates environments where employees willingly contribute ideas, raise concerns, and acknowledge mistakes without fear of retribution. Essential conditions for successful transformation requiring collective intelligence rather than mere compliance. Change fatigue represents a formidable barrier to transformation initiatives, particularly in organizations with histories of frequent direction shifts or incomplete implementation of previous strategic priorities. Organizational storytelling provides powerful mechanisms for reinforcing desired cultural attributes through recognition of exemplars whose behaviors embody aspirational values rather than relying exclusively on abstract principles. Structural enablers, including performance metrics, reward systems, and resource allocation processes, must align with desired cultural attributes, as employees inevitably prioritize behaviors that organizational systems actually reinforce regardless of stated values.